With this latest incident, what moves are left to the Philippines? To discuss, let me bring in our first guest for tonight, Justin Baquisal. He's a visiting fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS Asia. Good evening, Justin. Thanks for making time for us.
Hi, good evening, Regina, Sean, and Gretchen.
You're in Singapore right now, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You're doing a fellowship at the IISS, which, as everyone knows, is
Yes,
the organizer of the Shangri-La Dialogue.
correct.
Justin, very big question to start off with, which is at this point, what options are left to the Philippines? The MDT is something, the Mutual Defense Treaty is something that keeps being bandied about, but honestly, most of the analysts that we've spoken to say this does not constitute an armed attack just yet. From the US side, it doesn't seem like they are ready to pull the trigger either. And now we have, people like Senate President Cheese Escudero also saying we need to de-escalate the situation. What options are left to the Philippines at this point?
Right. I think right now there are three primary options for the Philippines at the strategic level. So number one, of course, we can keep doing the resupply missions to signal to China that the armed forces of the Philippines has the nerve and the determination that withstand protracted tension, meaning to say we will not buckle under the pressure and that we will continue to resupply DRP Sierra Madre, which is, of course, what China is trying to prevent here. Now, I would term that kind of action of status quo. So the Philippines doesn't necessarily have to invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty, but at the same time, it will keep pushing on these operational maneuvers. Second option, I think, would be to begin thinking about how to leverage the alliance with the United States to improve the deterrent effect vis-a-vis China. Because I think right now, it's very clear to everyone, it's evident that the current posture of the Philippines and the United States right now are not deterring China from undertaking these illegal coercive maneuvers, even against the Philippine Navy. So before, right, they're harassing civilians, they're harassing the Coast Guard, and then now it is outright that they are openly harassing the Philippine military. So in short, China has shown the intention that it will implement its sovereign claim to the area in Second Thomas Shoal. Third option, of course, although this is a bit more unlikely, is for some kind of political settlement between Manila and Beijing. So, of course, given the situation right now, that's not ideal because, of course, Beijing has the upper hand in terms of the escalation in the tensions right now, and it will try to extract so many concessions from the Philippines if we negotiate at this point in time. This is not a good bargaining position for the Philippines right now. At the tactical level, though, I think I'd like to say that on Senator Escudero's point that the Philippines already did various sorts of resupply missions, in fact. So this is sort of a buzzword already that maybe we can try something else. But frankly speaking, I think that it's not the main issue here. The main issue here is that China is showing that it will interdict any Philippine resupply to BRP Sierra Madre. So there's no easy solution. The Philippines have tried to resupply via the Coast Guard, via commissioned private vessels, via the Philippine Navy. We've tried to resupply traditional, maritime transport and also via airdrop. And the Philippines has tried to resupply with a live broadcast with the media and the most recent one through a covert operation. And all of these China has prevented. So I think the debate about the modality of the resupply is a ship that has already sailed. It's proven that this is actually not the main issue right now. The main issue is how can the Philippines continue to resupply the BRP Sierra Madre safely and, of course, without escalating broader tensions with China that will provoke a major international incident. So I think that's the main policy conundrum for the Marcos administration. And right now, what seems to be happening is that, number one, Malacanang, so far as we've noted, seems to be silent on this issue. So it's taking a cautious approach on how it speaks on this issue. And then secondly, of course, Secretary Gilbert Teodoro has already committed that the Philippine Navy will continue to resist Chinese maritime aggression. So in short, I think the Philippine government is leaning toward approach number one, which is we're going to continue the resupply mission and we will show the determination that, regardless of the pressure that China puts, the Philippines is going to continue its presence in the area. Now, operationally, I think final point on this, I think there has to be some sort of more creativity between the Philippines and the United States and how it is approaching the issue. We've already known that President Marcos has said that if there is one casualty that is a red line for the Philippines, meaning to say we will invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty with the US. But I think that sort of is a wrong approach or a wrong angle to the issue because basically we are waiting for a casualty to happen before the US Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty is called upon. But if you look at the way that China has operated, it is already trying to exercise control over Second Thomas Shoal, within which the BRP Sierra Madre is located. So even without any death, it is already undermining Philippine military and strategic interests in the area. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? So I think in this regard, the Philippines and the US could consider trying to fast track implementation, not just of the EDCA, but also forward deployment of assets in the West Philippine Sea area. Of course, this depends on the level of comfort of the Philippines, what type of US assets we are willing to host in the country, what type of assets the US is willing to send to the Philippines. So there has to be some sort of re-establishment of strategic deterrence with respect to China that, okay, you harass us at the tactical level, at the strategic level, the Philippine-US alliance will continue to grow stronger. So that's another option. But of course, there is an issue right now and China is banking on this, that the US-Philippine alliance is not as ironclad as it assumes.
Yeah.
That the Philippines
Yeah.
will be intimidated, right? That if we're intimidated, we will back down from this. We won't fall on the United States. So that's a major issue right now.
Right.
Justin, very, very curious to know because since you're in Singapore,
Right.
and were you able to witness the Shangri-La dialogue? Because some are saying that this is in response to the strong statements of the president saying that Filipinos do not yield. Or do you think this is in response, or this is the application of the new Chinese Coast Guard law? What was the reaction of the audience there in Singapore with what happened with the president's speech, also with the defense minister of China's speech?
Right. Yes, I was at the Shangri-La dialogue. In fact, I was able to ask President Marcos a question after his speech. But I think the broad reaction to President Marcos' speech was that it was very good. It was very measured in the sense that it's very calculated. So the speech of President Marcos contained two things, right? So number one, it's really a political peacocking on the part of his administration that it is signaling his resolve to go toe to toe with China on this, and that he will not blink in the face of pressure. That's number one. The second is that, of course, President Marcos sort of tried to address the uneasiness within ASEAN with regard to the increasing cooperation between the Philippines and the United States. Because, of course, there has been some international criticism that the Philippines is bringing in foreign forces into the region, that sort of thing. But, of course, the Philippine case is different because we are enlisting US support within our national territory, which, by the way, is a sovereign right of the Philippines to decide who we partner with or who we don't. But we also try to assuage the partners within ASEAN that President Marcos remains committed to ASEAN-led mechanisms when it comes to resolving disputes with China. So he expressed support for the conclusion of the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. So Marcos is trying to have a balancing act. Now, in terms of the reaction to this, I would say it's actually a mixed bag because, of course, naturally, some people will be uncomfortable with the policy of the administration, regardless of what the president tells on an international forum. And China has repeatedly mentioned this during the Shangri-La dialogue that they don't like what the Philippines is doing. So there is that. But at the same time, in terms of the impressions from China, because China this year during the dialogue was quite bellicose, right? So when the defense minister from China spoke, and during the question and answer portion, he only addressed two issues. Number one is the Taiwan issue, and then secondly is the South China Sea issue. And he practically ignored many of the other questions that were levied against China. And the most important question there, of course, is China's credibility. Because on the one hand, we have China having this rhetoric to not escalate tensions. But of course, on the other hand, at the tactical level, as we can see from the Philippines maritime transparency effort right now, that on the ground, actually, China is willing to escalate its behavior. And up to now, it has already led to a major security incident that led to the injury of a Filipino. Navy personnel.
Right. Justin, I would just like to ask, with regard to pursuing getting something from the United States, as we know that could be a deterring force in the South China Sea, but how do we actually go about it? It's so easy to say, right? But some are saying that we can invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty. However, it doesn't have to be to go to war, right? We can just ask for maybe a big boat to escort a bigger, maybe a ship from their navy to escort our supply missions. Because you're right, I was laying awake thinking, how will we resupply the troops over at the Sierra Madre? Because they will need provisions sooner rather than later, right? How do we then make that happen before, that area essentially kind of is blockaded already?
Right. You're right there, actually. So the Article 3 and 4 of the Mutual Defense Treaty is all about consultation in the event of an armed attack in the Pacific. So, of course, right now it's still unclear whether the Philippine government interprets this as an armed attack. But there are some remedial measures we can take. No? So, number one, just to preface this, I think the Marcos government right now wants the resupply missions to be an all-Filipino affair, meaning to say that it's actually not calling on the Americans to join these resupply missions, right? So the closest we've had before was American ISR vessels trying to shadow the Philippine operations in the area, but it hasn't actually joined the resupply mission. And the reason for this is not just optics, but principle, because at the end of the day, the tensions in the Second Thomas Shoal is between the Philippines and China, right? It's not between the US and China. It's a tension between our two countries, one smaller than the other. So I think the Marcos administration is sticking to that all Filipino resupply policy. But secondly, we can be creative with in terms of the US, right? So for example, right now, the US only has access to increased number of sites under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. What the Philippines and the US haven't actually discussed that much is forward deployed forces. So what types of aircraft are they going to deploy to the Philippines? What types of ranged fires are they going to deploy here, right? So that's the big question there. And I think, to be honest, China doesn't want that situation as well, wherein the Philippines sort of hunkers down and sort of fortifies itself, because that will be a bad strategic
Right.
positioning for China, right? So China might gain access to Second Thomas Shoal, but
Right.
it will lose the confidence of the Filipino people, and the Philippines sort of end up becoming this porcupine, right? That we are an island with many spikes, meaning to say we
Right.
are heavily fortified against China.
Right.
That's the strategic level. But at the tactical level, I think I don't think the Philippines necessarily need to innovate much, right? So number one, of course, we can change the type of vessel for the resupply, because what the AFP used during the resupply were inflatable boats, basically, although they were rigid hull. But this time we can try to use larger craft.
Right.
So, for example, when it came to the Philippine Coast Guard resupply missions, right, they were using larger classes of ships. And no matter how China tried to block those, it can, as much as it can only realistically water cannon large vessels. The
Right.
reason why China was able to board the Philippine resupply was because they were on small inflatable vessels.
Right.
So essentially, I think that's a big calculus. So of course, if the Navy is willing to up the ante on this and actually call China's bluff, will China actually board a
Yes.
Philippine Navy vessel in a resupply? I think that's something the Philippines can do.
Right. That's a
And
very
then
good.
secondly, yeah. And then secondly, I think what the Philippines can do in terms of this resupply, of course, is to basically try to continue more precise airdrop in the area, because right now the main problem is that when the Philippines does the airdrop will scatter over the nearby waters around Sierra Madre, and they have to
Right.
pick it up.
Yeah.
So it's also a technology issue, right? That we can perhaps use airlift vessels that have the
yeah.
capability to
Okay.
precisely drop
Yeah.
them on
Just-
Sierra Madre.
yeah,
But I
Justin,
think,
yeah.
again, as I mentioned before, my earlier point, in terms
Yeah.
of the tactics actually don't matter as much, because no matter how much the Philippines try to innovate the resupply, China will innovate the method of interception.
Right.
So
Justin,
that's what
Justin.
the Philippines have to prepare
Yeah,
for.
sorry, I sort of cut you off. We are out of time, but I cannot let you go without asking this question. I just need you to expound on one of your tweets. You said, I think one mistake by Manila in the past months is not going too far and quickly with facilities hardening plus augmented presence in the West Philippine Sea. It let itself be distracted by noise and ivory tower thinking, which, as events today show, mean absolutely nothing in a tactical encounter. You have 1 minute to expound on that,
Right.
please. Where is the ivory? Where is the
It's a
ivory
difficult
thinking?
job.
And what is the noise? And where's the ivory thinking?
Right.
Ivory tower thinking coming from?
I think I'll be frank about this, right? The noise, I think, so much has been the hype about the effect of transparency in and of itself. Because transparency in and of itself is not a strategy. Even if you put 100 media personnel there, if China is intent to stop the resupply, then it will stop the resupply. So the Philippines has to look at it more from the perspective of a military operation and how to do it. So the Philippines have to commit that if we are going to do the resupply, we have to repel China's efforts to stop the resupply. And that includes the basic question that if China again tries to board a Philippine Navy vessel, then naturally the Philippine Navy has to exercise its natural right to self-defense under international law to avoid to be boarded. Because under international law, China should not be boarding vessels of another state. That every vessel has a foreign immunity. So I think that's the goal. And I'd like to conclude by saying that I think the Marcos administration should by now already know that China has given up on trying to work with the Marcos administration, frankly. That's why it's applying maximum pressure on it. And it's hoping that maybe from the next administration, we're going to have President Sara Duterte or somebody more favorable to China. So I think Marcos has to decide whether it is all in on the defense of the West Philippine Sea or whether it will continue to take some half measures. So I think the broad strategy of the Marcos admin is already good. It's just that it has to credibly back it up that this incident will not, boarding incident will not happen again.
And really, that's what you're pertaining to about ivory tower thinking. It needs to get back down to grassroots, back to the basics.
Correct.